Hello, I'm professional attorney and very much amateur musician Scott Lesowitz. And before I get into anything that might be a little controversial for some people, I want to make it clear that I am very pro fair use. And I think that YouTubers who teach music or review music are treated unfairly overall. And it's unjust and a shame if a YouTuber ever has to give up 1 cent of revenue if their video is fair use. And also, I think, and this might be a little controversial to some of you, that puppies, babies, and whoever your favorite sports team is, they're all great. That said, with that in mind, especially the part about the puppies, I do have to disagree with some of Davie504's take on the Content ID system. So in Davie504's recent video complaining about the Content ID system, he basically made 2 sets of complaints I'm going to talk about. One is that the record companies or other copyright holders are putting Content ID claims and taking away the revenue from his videos that are fair use. And then the other complaint he makes that's different is that when he uploads a cover song, cover of a famous song, the rights holders are taking nearly all the ad revenue instead of doing what's more like a fair share. So I'm going to first deal with the unjustified Content ID claims and then at the end deal with the cover songs. So here's some of what Davie504 had to say about the unjust Content ID claims.
Things are really going downhill recently. One of my latest uploads got copyright claimed 8 times. 8 claims. These claims are on a video where I showcase some epic bass lines. That was clearly an educational video, and that's clearly fair use. In theory, if you get hit with a claim, you think it's wrong. Like when you are clearly operating under fair use, you have the right to dispute it. But in reality, whenever I dispute a claim, there is always a very real risk that the rights holder decides to escalate the situation. And if it escalates, you run the risk of getting a copyright strike.
So initially, Davie504 is correct that his video about the easiest bass riffs actually being hard to play, that's fair use. He plays a small portion of popular bass lines to show how people tend to play them incorrectly and then shows how to actually play them correctly. That's fair use. And as for the Content ID system and demonetization of videos, Davie504 seems to be saying that music YouTubers can never take the risk to do anything but accept all Content ID claims, give up their ad revenue every time there's a Content ID claim without even lodging a single dispute. They can't do anything. They have to just take it. I don't agree with that, although I do agree that the system is designed in a manner that makes it too risky for almost all YouTubers to justify fighting a copyright claim as far as they theoretically can and as far as they should be able to. And that's a shame, and that's an unjust result when their video is fair use and they're in the right and the video should not be demonetized at all. But that said, less of a bad thing is still better than 100% of a bad thing. Okay, so first let's go to what I think a lot of you will see as the dark side and think about this from the record companies and YouTube's perspective as to why Content ID claims are put on all videos that use copyrighted music, even though that inevitably means that there will be times that Content ID claims are put on videos that are fair use. And I think what they will tell you is that there's a huge number of videos on YouTube, and the vast majority of the time that music is used on YouTube, it's not fair use. And then for that relatively small minority of videos that are fair use, they can simply dispute the Content ID claim. I've done it many times. It's very easy. And then the copyright holder will then have to manually review it. And if they see that it is fair use, they'll release the claim. The YouTuber keeps all their money. Everybody lives happily ever after. They ride off on unicorns and everybody loves each other. And they also would say, the YouTube and the record companies, that look, if, we know that fair use can often be a bit difficult to decide, reasonable minds might disagree. So the YouTubers don't have to worry. They get one low risk, basically risk-free chance to dispute the Content ID claim without getting a copyright strike, because if the YouTuber's initial dispute of the Content ID claim is denied, then that does not lead to a copyright strike. So basically you get one free dispute. Now, Of course, in the real world, the system does not work perfectly like that all the times. And there certainly are times when the rights holders do deny a copyright, content ID dispute, even though the video is fair use. And that's a shame. Again, it's a shame. That said, I've spoken to major music YouTubers who routinely dispute the content ID claims they get on fair use grounds. And their experience has been that most of their content ID claims are successful, usually because the rights holder does not respond within 30 days as is required. So these YouTubers basically see the initial dispute as a very low risk way of getting a good chance of keeping their ad revenue like they should. So the big problem, and where the YouTuber really is put in an unfair position, is if the rights holder decides to deny the initial content ID dispute. Then, if the YouTuber keeps fighting, there is a serious risk of getting a copyright strike, because at that point, the rights holder only has two choices. One is to give up and let the video remain on YouTube while getting none of the ad revenue, all of it going to the YouTuber, or they have to issue a notice to YouTube demanding removal of the video under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, or DMCA, and that notice will lead to a copyright strike. Although, FYI, there is a way for rights holders to issue a delayed takedown notice, which gives the YouTuber one more chance to remove the video before YouTube will issue a copyright strike. Although, you're not going to rely on the kindness of the record companies. I get that. Now, YouTube will basically always remove a video if they receive a legally sufficient takedown notice under the DMCA, because otherwise YouTube risks being sued for copyright infringement. They risk losing their immunity to copyright strikes under the DMCA. And by the way, that's also why YouTube will ban channels or delete channels after 3 copyright strikes, is that under the DMCA, they cannot just sit by while repeat infringers are remaining on the platform. That said, YouTube is more strict than I think they need to be. Now, by the way, if a very brave YouTuber wants to fight the DMCA takedown demand, that YouTuber can submit a counter notification under the DMCA. And then YouTube has a web form for that. And as long as this is done correctly, YouTube, in response to the counter DMCA notification, will remove the copyright strike and will reinstate the video on YouTube. And they reinstate the video because that is the procedure that's called for under the DMCA. But obviously, this is a huge risk now for the YouTuber, because at this point, once they've done the counter notification, the record company only has one way to keep the video off of YouTube, and that is to sue the YouTuber for copyright infringement. And that's a huge risk. And, even if it's low probability they would actually file a lawsuit, you can understand that YouTubers are going to be very hesitant to do that. So now, ideally in the future, AI could be used to identify videos that are likely fair use. Those videos would never receive a content ID claim. However, I take for granted that that technology was not in place when the content ID system was designed and put into place. I also assume that even now that it likely would be, probably not particularly feasible to do that. And even if it were, YouTube would have to get the large music companies to agree to such a change in the content ID system, because they have contractual obligations and the content ID system is voluntary. It's not something called for in the law. So I doubt this is going to come anytime soon. So yes, it's unfair that YouTubers have to risk a lawsuit if they want a human who doesn't work for a record company or other rights holder to opine on whether their video is fair use. It's an unfair system. It's just not quite as unfair as Davie504 made it out to be. Now, as for cover songs, here's some of what Davie504 had to say.
Then YouTube finally introduced the concept of revenue sharing. The logic is pretty straightforward. If you perform a composition without using the original sound recording, the revenue gets shared between you and the original creator. On paper that sounds fair, but in reality the word shared is doing a lot of heavy lifting. Let me show you the reality. This video got around 800,000 views. My shared revenue for almost 1 million views, $224. Just for reference, 800,000 views should make around $2,000.
So, of course, I personally think it's unfair that the rights holders are claiming virtually all the money when someone covers a song. However, whether morally right or not, the rights holders can demand anything they want, including all of the money, because in reality, if not for the rights holders reaching an agreement with YouTube allowing their songs to be covered in exchange for, getting the benefits of claiming the revenue through the Content ID system, these covers would all be copyright infringement. Now you're likely thinking, but you don't need permission to make a cover song. That's only sort of right. One can cover a song, make a sound recording of the cover, and then sell the recording of that cover song, but one has to follow the rules for obtaining a compulsory license and then also pays the rights holder their share of any revenues, and it's as spelled out per law. And the rights holder has no ability to stop or veto the sale of the recordings of the cover song as long as those steps are followed. But compulsory licenses do not apply to audiovisual works. And a video of someone playing a song or any kind of music video on YouTube would be an audiovisual work. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. Maybe it was a little bit of a downer for some of you, but please like and subscribe. And to all the music YouTubers, keep doing the great work. I want you guys to receive as much of the revenue as possible when your videos are fair use.